Good morning and welcome to our garden. Eric and I are out here in one of our gardens this morning, and we're going to be starting planning for the first things that are going to go in the ground this spring. It is the very end of May here in New Brunswick, Canada, and we usually start planting our garden around this time. We'll start with our root crops first that can handle a bit of cold weather still, because it's still getting pretty chilly at night times here in New Brunswick. However, our seedlings that we have started indoors, we'll plant those out in a week or so in our other garden.
Yeah, so we tilled this up twice already, just get the ground ready, and then today, before we plant, we'll make rows with a rake and a hoe just by hand. And then that's pretty well the process here in this little garden.
And our other garden we'll show you in another video when we plant things, but that's a no-till garden, so we have two different methods going on. And also, at the end of this video, we're going to be working on our fruit garden, which is our third little garden we have, and it needs a lot of maintenance before things will grow in it this year. So let's get to work in our garden. They're going to mess up our rows. Our little chickens. Oh, there's a worm. Hi, little worm.
There's lots of worms.
It's a nice worm. So we just finished hilling up our rows, and then we watered it just so the soil wouldn't be quite so dry as we planted. And now we're going to plant our first crop, which is hopefully a year's worth of potatoes. So
we got a 50-pound bag of Yukon Gold seed potatoes this year. And previous years we've grown some, but not enough. We still had to buy at the end of the year.
And so the seed potatoes have some sprouts already, and we usually cut them in half. We're going to do that this year?
Yep, as long as there's an eye on the half, you can plant it.
And this year we're also going to be adding a little bit of nutrients to the soil, because our soil is really rich in nitrogen, and we want to add, so we're going to add some bone meal to add a bit more phosphorus, and hopefully that'll help us produce more potatoes and less leaves. So we're going to get started with our potatoes.
So basically what I was taught to do is you take your seed potato, and it has an eye here, and the other side, you can't see it quite yet, but it has eyes on this side also. And so you just cut it in half, and you basically just bury that, and that'll be a potato plant.
So we cut our potatoes in half because we've always done that. We've never had an issue with rot, and so that's why we're doing that, just because it's what we know and what has worked for us. And also, as I plant them, I'm going down about 4 inches down, and then I'm going to pat it down and then leave about 6 inches and put the next one. And so that's what our spacing is about, and then cover them up. Do you want to cut them in half and I'll plant them?
Yep.
And as we're planting them, we're putting the sprouted side, or where the eye is. It might be an eye that hasn't yet sprouted, but we're putting that up so that when the plant grows, it comes up through the soil.
I think we're going to have some left over.
We don't have to cut them in half though. If we don't,
Maybe some of the smaller ones.
The small ones we should just plant whole maybe.
Okay.
So now that our potatoes are all on the ground, we're going to move on to our onions. And see, these are onion sets, so they're like the little bulbs of onion. We've tried last year doing the onions from seed, but I just don't think we have a long enough growing season, or we should have started them way sooner indoors, but they didn't work out very well for us. So we're just going to go back to what we like the most, which is the onion sets. And we're going to try to see if we have 100 sets, and we're going to hopefully get them all on the ground so we can have a lot of onions. We use a lot in the winter, so we'd like to grow more this year than we did last year.
So with onion sets, it's pretty simple. You plant it bottom down, top up, and we'll plant them in a couple, about an inch deep and a couple inches apart. I don't think you plant them too deep.
No, I don't want them too deep.
Yep. Perfect.
There we go.
So we got all our onions planted, and we did have enough room in that row for 100 onions. And Maggie and I were just talking, and we thought that, you know what, eventually we could probably grow upwards of 300 because we eat a lot of onions, so maybe in the future. Now we're going to move on to planting our rest of our root crop here. We have carrots, beets, and some parsnips. And that's the first year we're going to try parsnips.
We had a really good yield of beets last year, and so we actually have some left in the freezer and pickled of last year's beet that we haven't eaten yet. So we're going to just do a few so we can eat the beet greens because we quite like those in the summertime, and have a couple fresh ones, but we don't need to actually store any this year, which is really nice. The species we have here, so we have volcano carrots, albino parsnips, and Detroit dark red beets. We've done these beets before, they're really good for us. And these other two types, they're new to us, but they're from Vessi seeds, and we've gotten seeds from them in the past and we like them. So that's what we're going to plant. Last but not least, the beets.
Good.
Yep. Now we're going to be putting some old bedding in between the rows, just like in the aisles where we walk, to try to help keep the water retained in the garden. Last year in our no-dig garden, we used this around all of our plants, and we found we had to water like half the amount of time as we did in this garden. So this year we're going to be bringing the same idea over here. Ideally you'd use straw for this, but we don't have any straw. We have old goat bedding, which is actually old hay, but it is also have a bit of fertilizer in it since there's manure in it. So we're going to be using that in between the rows, and then after the plants start to sprout, we'll bring that mulch up and around them, and our hope is that it'll mean we have to water a lot less this year. So now that we have the vegetable garden in, we've headed up here to our fruit garden, and right now it's looking more a bit like a jungle than a garden. We've kind of just let it go until now, and so Eric's actually going to whippersnip it to try to get some of these weeds back, and then I'm going to weed out the beds and going to prune back the raspberries, plant a couple more blueberry bushes, and hopefully maybe lay something down on top of the aisles to try to keep all of those weeds from coming back up. We'll see about that. So let's get started. So as I'm going through and weeding out my raspberries, I'm just looking out that I don't pull any of the little raspberry bushes out. These guys, I planted this whole thing last year, and I'll link to that video if you want to go check it out. But these did not produce any fruit last year, but I'm really impressed with how many little baby raspberry plants are coming up. So just as I weed, I'm just being really careful that I only take out the stuff that is not a raspberry bush, and keeping all these little tiny raspberry plants so that in a couple of years I'll have a nice bed full of mature raspberry plants. So we have the berry garden all whippersnip now. Eric has that done. I did a bit of weeding, but honestly that will be just take a really long time. So I'm going to work away at that in the coming week. And then the last thing we're going to do today is plant our 2 new blueberry bushes. So last year we had 2 blueberry bushes, and they were I think like a lemonade or something, kind of a different variety, and they're a pink color. However, they didn't produce any blueberries, and I'm thinking it's for 2 reasons probably. One is that there was only the one variety, and for best results, so you can have cross-pollination, you should have really 2 species, but I did not because they were all sold out in my area last year. So I'm going to be planting 2 new species this year. We have Chippewa blueberry, and then a Northland blueberry. So I'll be planting those here, and I'm hoping to get some fruit off them this year. Something else I'm going to be doing is going to go collect some pine needles and put them around to mulch around the blueberry bushes. Since our soil, I think it could use some acidity, and those pine needles will add that acidicness to them and hopefully leach down into that soil and help out, because blueberries like acidic soil. So that's what I'm going to do, is going to dig those holes, and then I'm going to eventually mulch around them, give them some water since they're newly planted, and then we're going to call it a day for out in the garden.